So now we're going to talk about flowering plants and their structure and organization. So these are all things you might have heard about before, but now you're going to be really familiar with them. So here is what our plant body looks like, and you're going to learn about all of those words on there. So first, we have our organs of flowering plants, and this is broken into the roots, the shoots, and the leaves, which are the three vegetative organs. So by vegetative, it basically means things that are not reproductive organization or reproductive organs. So reproductive organs are things like flowers, fruits, everything like that. These are all the parts that are just the regular part of the plant. So the roots are what we find below the soil. Then the shoots are everything above, mostly the stems. And then, well, the shoots are everything above, broken into the stems and the leaves. So those are our three types of vegetative organs. So first we have the roots, which are located mostly underground. You guys probably could have told me that. And something that you might not know is that they are at least equivalent in size and extent to shoot system. So if you see a very large plant above ground, you are most likely to find a very large root system for that plant underground. Your book says a single corn plant may have roots as deep as 2.5 meters and spread out over 1.5 meters. So what is that? 9 feet, almost 8-ish feet deep and about 4.5 feet wide. So that's one corn plant. So that's pretty crazy. Whereas a tree that lives in the desert, a mesquite tree, may have roots that penetrate to a depth of over 20 meters, which is 60 feet. So that's crazy. The job of roots is to anchor the plant in the soil. That way it's not moving around, and provide support. I think that makes sense, right? We don't want to fall over, so we need something that's keeping us in place. And they absorb minerals and water from the soil. So those are kind of their two main jobs. They are cylindrically shaped, which allows for water to be absorbed from all sides, and it allows it easy to move through the soil as they grow. And then there are also these things called root hairs, which are tiny little projections that grow off of the root epidermal cells. So they're actually part of the cells that are on the outside of the roots. And these are what actually absorb the minerals and the water from the soil. And these root hairs increase the surface area of the roots exponentially. So it allows for a ton more absorption to happen. So let's look at this picture. Down here is the root system we were talking about. So it's everything below ground. So here we have the roots, and then we have these branch roots, which grow off the primary root, go straight down. And all of these branch roots have tiny little root hairs on them. And so they do, like I said, most of the absorption of the root. And so this is why if you just kind of rip a plant out of soil and try and replant it, it's not going to do as well as if you actually transplant it and move it with the soil, because when you rip it out, you're losing all of the secondary roots and the root hairs, which do the majority of the absorption. So if you're moving a plant, you want to actually cut it out of the soil and move it. And then roots also produce hormones that control how big the stem is growing and make sure that they are roughly the same size, because it makes the most sense for the plant's roots and shoots to be about the same size. That way they can work well together. Then next we have the stems. So this is part of the shoots system, and the shoots are made of stem, branches, and leaves, everything you see above the ground. And the stem has a terminal bud at the top, which allows for elongation and new leaf production. So here's our picture again. Here's our terminal bud right at the top. And so this is where the plant is growing upward from, and it allows for new branches to grow off from the side. Because as you get taller, you have space for more of these things. A node is where leaves are attached to the stem, and the space between them is the internode. Inter means in between, so the internodes are the spaces in between the nodes. So right here is a node, because that's where this branch is attached to the stem. And so in between here is the internode, just like it's labeled right here. This is the internode, and here's another node. Now nestled in between the node and the stem are what we call axillary buds. So we have a terminal bud up here. It's at the end, so it's terminal. Here, axillary means off to the side. So these ones are off to the side. And like I said, they're nestled in between the stem and the branch, or the leaf. And they allow for lateral growth. So growth happens at the buds, and so terminal bud allows for upward growth, and axillary buds allow for growth outwards. Axillary buds are found at nodes and can produce new branches, And we can sometimes, it's not on this picture, but sometimes we can have underground stems called rhizomes. And so they are actually stems, but they're just a little bit below the soil. And they allow for expanded outward growth. So this is how plants like, what does your textbook say? Plants like ginger or bamboo, they actually like shoot off a little bit under the ground and then grow up from there. So those are rhizomes. And then our stems also contain vascular tissue. So this is like your vascular tissue, like your heart and your veins and your arteries that move your blood and your nutrients around your body. The stems have vascular tissue that transport water and minerals, all the things that the plants need, just like your cardiovascular system, because it's attached to your heart, moves everything around your body that you need. The stems increase the length of the shoot system. That makes sense. As the stem grows upward, the shoot system is going to get bigger. The stems can perform photosynthesis. They don't always, but they can. In some plants, like a cactus, it's the main photosynthetic organ. So on a cactus, the spikes are actually the leaves, just crazy evolutionary adaptation. And so the cactus, the part that you see, is the whole stem. And so that's the only part that's doing photosynthesis. The tiny little spines, they're not doing photosynthesis. And stems can also store nutrients. And so some underground stems store a lot of nutrients, such as potatoes. Those are stems, so they can also store nutrients. Then lastly, we have the leaves. This is also part of the shoot system. And normally, leaves carry on the majority of photosynthesis because they are well adapted to be green and absorb sunlight and do that job. And they receive water by way of the stem. So the stem brings up water from the root system to the leaves. The structure is incredibly variable. They can look like a maple leaf, which is what you guys, or a leaf on plant outside, you know. They can also be very, very, very tiny or very, very, very large. Some palm leaves are, your textbook says, up to 6 meters in length. They can be crazy different colors. They can be really smooth. They can have hairs on them. They can be pine needles. They can be cactus spines. Leaves can have adapted to be crazy, crazy things. And some plants that bear leaves all year long, these are called evergreens, like pine trees or Christmas trees. And plants that shed their leaves in the summer are called deciduous. And like I said, these plants are very well adapted for photosynthesis, the way that they're long and thin so that the majority of their cells are receiving sunlight. That way they can do photosynthesis. If they were bigger this way and the sun was coming from right here, all these cells down here wouldn't be getting any sunlight, couldn't do photosynthesis. So by saving their energy and being thin but spread out, they're allowing for much more photosynthesis to happen. And the wide portion of the leaf is called the blade, and the petiole is the stalk that attaches it to the stem. So up here we have a leaf, and right here, this whole part is the blade, and this thing right here is a petiole. It's where the leaf attaches to the stem. It's technically part of the leaf, and this thing in the middle that looks like a connection or continuation of the petiole into the leaf is called the vein, and that's what has the majority of the vascular tissue in it that supplies the leaf with water and carbon dioxide. Then lastly, let's talk about, there's 2 different main kinds of flowering plants. And this is dependent on the number of cotyledons or seed leaves. And what this is inside the seed, inside the seed, there are these things called cotyledons, and they provide nutrients to a growing embryo. So monocots stands for monocotyledon, 1 meaning mono. So these guys have, monocots have 1 cotyledon. Eudicots or eudicots, I will always call them dicots, even my textbook calls them eudicots. They are eu meaning true, di meaning 2, cotyledons. So they have 2 true cotyledons. And so they're down here. This would be 1 on either side of this growing embryo right here. And cotyledons that are found in dicots supply nutrients for seedlings. So the growing seed gets its nutrients from the cotyledons in a dicot. But in a monocot, they act as transfer tissue. And the nutrients are derived from the endosperm before the true leaves begin photosynthesizing. So up here, they don't supply nutrients to the seedlings. They just allow the nutrients to come in from someplace else. So that's one difference. Here, that's between monocots and dicots is the seed. Then the roots are set up totally differently. So in a root, we haven't learned about xylem and phloem, but that is the vascular tissue, and we will learn about that. So in the monocot root, the vascular tissue is arranged in a ring, and in dicots, it's arranged in, it's in the center. And then in the stem, the vascular tissue is arranged like crazy, just scattered in bundles in the stem of a monocot, but in a dicot, it's arranged in a ring. So I still remember this from high school: monocot root, dicot stem. Monocot vascular bundles are spread in a circle in the root and spread in a circle in the stem in a dicot. Just got to remember that somehow. Then this is the easiest, or what most people remember about monocots versus dicots. Monocots, they have their veins in a single parallel line. So right here in the leaf, the veins are parallel. They move from one end to the other. Whereas in dicots, they look kind of like they're spreading out, you know, so they spread out throughout the entire thing. So they're in a net pattern. So this is things like grasses, and this is things like a maple leaf. And then you can also count the flower parts, and that can distinguish between monocots and dicots. So on a monocot, the flower parts are arranged in threes, or multiples of threes. So there's 3 petals right here, 3 petals right there. There would be 3 or 6 carpels, and which are reproductive organs in here. And then on a dicot, they are arranged in multiples of 4 or 5s. So those are the main differences between monocots and dicots. And you don't need to know that. So, like I said, those are monocots and dicots. Those are the important things to know about the structure of flowering plants.